start with the fibers in the lateral column of the spinal cord. So in the lateral column there are ascending as well as the descending fibers. Both are present. So first of all we will make the diagram of the spinal cord. As I have already told you, first you make the straight line, that is the posterior median septum, then make the elevation of the fasciculus gracilis, then make the elevation of the fasciculus cuneatus bilaterally. Then you start making the posterior horn, conical, and the ventral horn, broad, then this is the lateral column, this is the anterior column, anterior median fissure, and from here again the lateral column of this side, and you complete the spinal cord diagram like this. So this is the lateral column. So here are also present the tracts or the ascending and descending fibers. So there are present at the peripheral part two type of the tracts. So in the lateral column, so there are so many. So first we will take the anterior and posterior spinocerebellar. Tracts. So in this situation, they are present near the peripheral part of the lateral column. This is the anterior one, spinocerebellar, and this is the posterior spinocerebellar. And when we dissect and study the fibers, what we see that the type of the fibers, as name is spinocerebellar, it means they are going from spinal cord to the cerebellum. So they are ascending. If they are ascending, it means they are sensory. They are bringing some information and going to give to the brain. So when they are sensory, then question arises, which type of sensations they carry. So when we see the sensations, then we came to know that these sensations, they are the proprioceptive sensation. From the joints of synovial joints of the lower limb. So these type of the sensations, they are carrying the proprioceptive sensations of the lower limb. They are carrying. Same we have already done, that the structures in the synovial joint of the lower limb, that is the fibrous capsule, the ligaments, the muscles, the tendons, the synovial membrane, the articular cartilages. So all the structures of the joint and periosteum of the bone taking part in the joint formation. So nerves ending, they start from all these points, all these structures and they form a nerve. And this nerve is carrying the, whenever we move the joint, so the movement of the joint disturb all the structures of the synovial joint, and an impulse is generated which go through the articular branch of that particular nerve, and this will go as a posterior root of the 31 pairs of the spinal nerve, and it goes first into the dorsal root ganglion, and then this first order neuron, it will enter into the posterior horn. So this is how the proprioceptive sensations from the lower limb joints, ankle joint, subtalar joint, knee joint, hip joint, all they are going to the position, whether they are in flexion or extension or mid flexion or any position. So this all information is going to the cerebellum. So this is how we attempt the type, the sensation, if the sensations they are, which type of the sensations they are carrying. And now come the course, as it is also the sensory. So the course will be in 3 steps, that is the first order neuron, second order neuron, and third order neuron. So 3-step journey will be there. Ultimately they will reach the cerebellum. Now question arises, when these are the same sensations they are carried by the spinocerebellar tract, why there are 2 anterior and posterior? Now the answer is, it is because of the course of these 2 tracts. So course of these 2 tracts, both are reaching the cerebellum, but the difference in the course. So that we will take one by one. First we will take the first order neurons. Now in the first order neuron, so this is the first order neuron, because this start first of all gathering the information from the joint and going into the central nervous system, that is the spinal cord. So it is labeled as the first order neuron, which goes into dorsal root ganglion. And in the dorsal root ganglion, this nerve will are both anterior as well as the posterior. So spinal cord is also bilateral symmetrical. So whatever the tracts are present on the right side, same are present on the left side. So here also both anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tracts. Now this first order neuron enters into the posterior horn, but it doesn't relay, and without relay it goes into the posterior spinocerebellar tract, and from here it ascends upward. So this is the posterior spinocerebellar. But other fibers, they are also coming from the same joint, but they relay in the posterior horn. Those fibers who relay in the posterior horn, then a second order neuron start, and this second order neuron cross, as a rule second order neuron always cross, So they cross the midline, and in the anterior commissure or white commissure, and they go into the anterior spinocerebellar, and then they ascend upward. So there are difference into the anterior and the posterior spinocerebellar fibers. So always remember, posterior spinocerebellar fibers, they are uncrossed. And anterior spinocerebellar, they are crossed fibers. They cross the midline. So that's why they are different. Two groups are there, anterior and the posterior. So next step is the second order neurons. So second order neurons, they are only present in the anterior spinocerebellar fibers. So these anterior spinocerebellar fibers, which are crossed, now they are present in the opposite side of the spinocerebellar tract of the lateral column. So from the spinal cord, these fibers now they have to go to the cerebellum. So this is the first atlas vertebra. So here the spinal cord ends and the medulla starts. This is the floor of the fourth ventricle. So this is the medulla oblongata. Lateral part is called inferior cerebellar peduncle. This is the midbrain with the superior colliculus and inferior colliculus. And below the inferior colliculus, on either side, there are present superior cerebellar peduncle. So you have to remember the brain, the dorsal or the posterior view of the brain stem. Now the crossed fibers from the spinal cord, from the posterior anterior spinocerebellar fibers, they go up, and now from the spinal cord, as they are ascending, they reach the medulla. Now their name is spinocerebellum, so they have to reach the cerebellum. So this anterior cerebellar fibers, they go from the medulla, and this is the pons, this is the medulla. Now these fibers, they enter into the pons, and above, this is the smallest part of the brain, the midbrain. So these anterior spinocerebellar fibers, which are present here, they are ascending up, and they reach the midbrain, and from the midbrain then they turn down and they enter into the superior cerebellar peduncle. And these fibers, with the fibers of the superior cerebellar peduncle,